Frieren is an elf who's lived for over 1,000 years. She has watched friends come and go, but even with such short lives, they change the course of history. They change her, slowly at first, but by the time they're done, those 10 short years have become a part of her that she won't ever forget. And those faces never truly leave her, because she lives in a world they made together, with the sons and daughters of those heroes, this age of humanity, and she couldn't be more proud. Frieren Beyond Journey's End is an anomaly of an anime, based on the manga by Kanehito Yamada, directed by Kichiro Saito, and animated by Studio Madhouse. Frieren is 28 episodes of some of the most emotional, well-animated, well-written, well-paced, well-memed television you will ever see. It has resonated with so many that while it might not be the perfect anime, I think calling it a masterpiece and potentially anime of the year would be wholly appropriate. As of this video, it has unseated Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood on Mal of all places as the best rated anime of all time and has stayed up there for months, and that is a feat nigh unheard of. But why? Why is this anime blowing up in the way it has? There are so many other television animes that deal with the passage of time, with love and regret, with fantasy and elves and slice of life. Is it because we finally have a great non-isekai fantasy anime? Well, yes, but it's more than that. In my opinion, as much as Frieren is about the past and regret and love, beyond the heartbreak and the pain, there is a hope for the future, almost naively so. A hope for human connection, for the betterment of the world, not in spite of all those we've lost, but because of them. That turns what would have been a melancholic, depressing tale into something truly inspiring. An age of humans. The world of Frieren is familiar. Humans, elves, dwarves, dragons, demons, monsters, and possibly even gods populate this fantasy land. Humanity is the most widespread, but that was not always the case, and if demons had their way, wouldn't be much longer. This setup is not unique to Frieren. There is a version of this in almost every fantasy anime or even fantasy property that takes inspiration from Western mythology and folklore. But please do not confuse the familiar with the generic. This is no paint-by-the-numbers isekai or video game-adjacent world. Though Frieren follows in the coattails of common fantasy tropes, it makes it its own, and wholeheartedly engages in its own world and setting. There is history here. We see it both through Frieren's own life, but also through the memories and relics of people who lived both before and with her. We see the early stages of human civilization, their clothes visibly distinct from the current generations, their magic and abilities a far cry from what they will become. We learn of the great mages of this era, human and elf, who literally changed the world and the course of humanity. And we see the ripple of its effects. We see the years of Frieren's party, the history of the most important band of heroes to ever exist in this age, as they saunter their way to eventually defeating the Demon King that we, as a passive observer, never see. And we are given this lore, these sprinkles of world building sparsely. We never get this full history outright, no full episode of the party of heroes, but instead we see murals, tomes, statues, legends, personal stories. We engage in history not as an omniscient viewer, but as a traveler, a historian alongside Frieren. The more we engage in the anime, the more we learn these pieces of the past from both her eyes and the eyes of everyday people. Outside of its history, the world of Frieren is also built upon surprisingly sound reasoning, with many of its world-building questions answered naturally as the series goes on. If elves live so long, why are there so few of them? Well, simply they don't really have a drive to reproduce or have romance, and are often highly solitary. The three named elves we meet in this story all embody this feeling to some extent, having no direct lovers or biological children to speak of. It also doesn't help that the Demon King may have attempted to genocide them during his reign. Why don't humans negotiate with demons? Well, because demons are moralless apex hunters with no concept or capacity to empathize. Why doesn't magic just solve all of humanity's problems? Easy, because magic is complex, and while there was a point in history of this world where human mages were abundant and did battle at the same levels of demons, this era of peace has outlived most of them, and even the few that still live or are new to the craft specialize in demon hunting magic. Humans in general just haven't made it a priority to learn the spells that would make lives better outside of combat. I could go on, but you get the point. It's clear that the world of Frieren, while familiar, is meticulously thought out and sewn together in a way that not only makes general logical sense, but also allows for a certain level of mystery and awe that we are able to see even in the later episodes of the anime. We are instilled in that same sense of wonder and discovery in the same way that Frieren is when she sees that chest that is totally not a mimic and definitely has a super secret rare grimoire inside, 99% accuracy predicting spell be damned. But speaking of grimoires, now I want to talk about the magic system of Frieren, which in all seriousness is probably one of the best, most robust systems ever put to animation, and it's integral to its world building as well. Things to keep in mind: there are two main types of magic in Frieren. One is holy magic. It's less shown in the series as the party only travels with a priest for a small amount of time, but this magic is generally described as healing or clerical magic, good for poisons and battle wounds, and even occasionally combat, and generally requires a holy book and a knowledge of a priest to use it. I.e., Frieren can do really basic holy magic, but not a ton, which I personally think is really cool because it keeps Frieren from being OP and gives priests in this world a real purpose in specialization. This magic is derived from the goddess of creation, and what I find interesting is not necessarily the magic itself, but the people who follow its goddess. Unlike some shows, the church and its people in Frieren have been, as of Season 1, generally shown to be flawed but good people. Ones who you wouldn't necessarily think would believe in a goddess, especially Kraft, an elf older than Frieren, who acknowledges that this goddess has never once shown herself, and in a world of elves who live for millennia, they can verify that. But he still believes, needs to believe as he says, because at the end of his life, he wants to go to heaven, and have someone acknowledge the life he's lived. He wants to be remembered by someone, anyone, even if it's just a god. There's a really compelling conversation between him and Frieren that I don't have time to get into at the moment, but it was really interesting to see the foundation of this healing magic coming from people who arguably are trying to find ways to heal or comfort themselves. And while Kraft himself is not shown to be able to use this magic, Sign and Heiter are, and they fall under a very similar category. Also, this magic implies that there is a canonical heaven and hell in this world, one of which Frieren is explicitly trying to reach, which means this magic will almost certainly play a larger role later in the story. Now, for the more mage's magic system. A mage's magic in Frieren is limited only by one's knowledge and imagination, and while those parameters may feel like a cop-out explanation to make magic virtually anything, it's actually a really interesting way to structure a soft magic system that essentially allows for the possibility of anyone to be a great mage so long as they have the imagination and drive for it. Most of the magic we see can be split up into three categories. First, we have Frieren and Fern's favorite, the everyday spells. Magic not inherently used for combat or life or death situations, but for everyday use. Cleaning spells, flying spells, location spells, spells for making fruit more sour. I love how blown away Frieren and Fern are by what we would consider to be rather mundane abilities, such as the ultimate laundry spell, which is lauded by Frieren as being an example of legendary magic, and Considering they live in a time without laundry machines and are constantly traveling on the road, that makes perfect sense. And I think it says a lot about Frieren's love for magic, that despite being so powerful, she's just as happy to find a grimoire with a spell to make shaved ice as she would be to find the ultimate kill spell. Alongside these everyday spells, we have offensive magic, which really shines in the latter half of Frieren. To start, there's a clear history of offensive magic. Originally, humans considered magic to be demonic and blasphemous, until great mages like Flamel convinced ancient kings that learning magic would be paramount to defeating demons. That led to humanity adopting magic mainly for combat purposes, a sentiment still held in the world today. It started relatively basic, but humans and elves studied demon magic and reverse engineered their own attacks and defensive capabilities over time, a time that Frieren actively saw over and helped with. And then, as warfare progressed, humans slowly stopped using Zoltrak in favor of high-impact magic spells that utilize and manipulate physical objects as a way to circumvent magical shields, as these shields, which were developed specifically to combat demon attack magic, were not as in tune to deflecting physical attacks. So already we have this really interesting magic system history which we can use to contrast Friren's techniques with the other mages of the exam arc. Thanks to Frieren's teachings, Frieren has become the embodiment of the saying, "I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I fear the slightly awkward pouty purple girl who has practiced Zoltrak 10,000 times from the tender age of 5. But the other mages are no slouches either. Very few mages use the same types of attacks. There are physical spells, mental magic, and brainwashing, special moves that can be learnt and are inherently OP, that are so powerful and archaic you can barely understand what's going on, but you know that if you were in the middle of that, you'd be killed in an instant. And even magic that the series doesn't yet fully explain to you on purpose, leaving you and the rest of the cast with the understanding that even though you've just watched Frieren's clone conjure up a black hole, there is still more powerful magic and spellcasting to be seen. And the anime makes a point to emphasize that even though some mages are clearly stronger than others, no battle is certain. Even the strongest of mages can lose to a bad set of circumstances or a particularly odd matchup, such as the crazy Ubel, who lost to this rather plain-looking fella in bondage, Northern Corpse armor, yet ended up absolutely crushing one of the most powerful clones in the later dungeons because of her odd way of thinking. Because magic in this world is limited only by one's drive and imagination, and a sound strategy and plan is just as important as raw magical ability. There is, at all times, a feeling of a venerable arms race for magic in Frieren's world, and that just makes Frieren and Friren's rejection of that race all the more interesting, considering how strong they are. And the other mages have their own beliefs and reasons and philosophies about magic that are displayed in their wands, in their demeanor, in their clothes, in how they approach a challenge, in their convictions, and it's fascinating to see. And what is also fascinating to see in Frieren is its animation, and by extension, its music, sound design, and overall direction. Frieren is beautiful. Full stop, there is no better way to describe it. Every bit of background scenery, all the many different locations, the changes in the days, the changes in the seasons, the movements of people and animals, the shadows, the gags. It reminds me of a constant watercolor painting, and it helps make the world feel very alive and lived in. Locations are distinct. People look different. The color palettes are pleasant. You could pause your screen at almost any point in the anime and have a veritable screensaver right there. And yet, the animation never feels stiff, at least not for extended periods of time. And outside of the many battles of the series, there are bouts of really incredibly smooth animation, like Stark putting on his clothes, Frieren and Stark dancing, Frieren searching for a lost ring, that makes these characters feel real, like they're moving right in front of you. There's so much fine detail in the episode-to-episode animation. And when it comes to the rising action scenes, the animators go absolutely ham, with fluid motion, with most battles feeling like a dance almost, complemented by incredibly well put together sound design. All the hits and the magic cast sounds like whatever they should sound like, either explosions or cuts or rocks flying through the air, like a real battle going on around you. This weighty magic animation has weighty sound design to boot, and the effects, light flashes, hair moving and body parts turning, the energy rising with the music, warriors zipping around like jet planes, and when someone is hurt, it's not just a burn or a knockback effect. Injuries are freaking brutal. People are blown away, chopped in two, launched against walls, impaled. There is a sense of danger during these battles. And generally, this animation would just be blatant flexing if it wasn't complemented by such breathtaking scene composition. Quick side note, the director of Frieren also directed Bocchi the Rock, which is a 10 out of 10 slice of life comedy anime, which actually explains a lot. But if you aren't paying attention to Keiichiro Saito's work, you might be missing out on one of the greatest rising directors in all of anime right now. Anyway, Frieren excels in making its key moments shine. Its animation, its themes, its music coming together to make breathtaking moments that are seared into my mind as much as they are in Frieren's. And you can find multiple of these scenes every single episode, these emotional explosions that other shows and animes couldn't replicate as frequently or as perfectly even if they tried. And speaking of emotion, as much as I love the animation and direction of Frieren Beyond Journey's End would not have hooked me and held me in such an emotional vice if it wasn't for, in my opinion, its greatest asset, its music. Frieren has both really strong and fun OPs and Millet's absolutely heart-wrenching ED, anytime, anywhere, which, disclaimer, I have listened to over 100 times and is probably the most devastating in-context anime ED I've ever heard. Like, Jesus Christ, man, just rip my heart out while you're at it. Outside of the intro and the end songs, a majority of Frieren's music is written and composed by a man named Evan Call. If you do not know who Evan Call is, let me fix that for you. Evan Call is an American composer working in Japan and has done music for multiple projects in several anime. He is most well known for his work on Violet Evergarden. In my humble, musically illiterate opinion, to clarify, Evan Call is a genius and my favorite modern composer, and I don't even listen to orchestral music. For Frieren, he's created one of the most sprawling, beautiful works of music composition I have ever heard. From Journey of a Lifetime to Zoltrak to many other tracks that I can't currently name as of the point I am recording this video because they have not released on iTunes yet, but you better believe I'm downloading every single one of them the moment it does. Evan Call's music captures so much emotion, evoking the feelings of epic fantasy classics like Lord of the Rings. It consists of ensemble orchestras, strings, flutes, choirs, oboes, instruments I can't even name, to create a soundtrack that has inspired me, brought me to the edge of my seat and to the edge of tears. Evan Call's work is second to none, and his touch helps to bring the whole of Frieren's emotions and moments together in an anime production that is so lightning in the bottle perfect it borderlines insanity, or as I like to call it, One Punch Man Season 1. And that would be all well and good. On those merits alone, Frieren would be an 8 out of 10. But there's a reason why Frieren is still that high on Mal. Wow, even this much later. That prevalent in pop culture, that memed and beloved. That's because Frieren's characters, its journeys, beyond its end, is not only a tale that feels so personal to so many, but it's also a tale that we really want to hear. The first several episodes of Frieren, which I covered a while back in my video How Love Defies Time, you should go watch that, deals heavily with Frieren's regret. She realizes too late she didn't spend as much time with the people she truly cared about before they died. Himmel and Heitzer, and even Eisen to an extent, although he's still alive. The only two times we see her cry in the show are over Himmel's grave and as she comes to terms with Heitzer's failing health. And she spends the next years slowly learning about human life and what it's like to truly know someone. And while regret and sadness are a part of Frieren, inexplicably so, what I want to focus on now, what Byrne and Stark and her new journey represent, is what comes after. Beyond the sadness, the growth, and the themes of human connection in Frieren that carry from the first few episodes of the series to the very end. Because as I said in the beginning of this review, Frieren Beyond Journey's End is unlike most stories of those who live forever. Because where normally there is only sadness and regret, in Frieren, there is such a genuine hope and celebration of the future and a belief in the goodness of people, that it turns this melancholy, lonely story into a sprawling celebration about the resilience and the power of those memories and those people who believed in us and still believe in us and give us hope. While the death of the Demon King brought about peace to the world, the death of Himmel the hero marked a tremor. We don't see it fully, but evil never truly left Frieren's world once the Demon King died. It only hibernated until it was safe to come out. We hear it in the whispers to the north, we learn of it through our own orphaned main characters, we watch it unfold inside a kingdom, demons emboldened by the death of the hero, the remnants coming out of the woodwork to hunt man once more, and the world is tired. The mages of old have died out. The elves are going extinct, the classic heroes are gone, and most know Frieren only as legend. This should be a world inching towards catastrophe. And yet, it's not. The cities that Frieren visit are rarely racked by war. People are kind, gracious, unafraid of travelers. They have festivals, culture, family generations that have not been wiped off the face of the earth. Humanity is not on the brink, far from it. Save in the more dire situations, every city Frieren enters and leaves is a happy one. And in the north, humans don't run scared, they fight. And though they face heavy losses and evil men, they don't fight in vain. There are new heroes, and they don't just appear from nothing. Closer to the end of the season, a mage named Werble, hey, it's the bondage guy, sits down next to Frieren after he helps a lady pick up her spilled fruit at the market. Werble is a man who has been through hell. He grew up in the north, where demons began attacking his village once Himmel died. He's become a soldier who fights demons and even the horrors that other northern nations have wrought, killed women and children to protect those he must. And yet, during the mage exam, where killing is 100% allowed, and with the option to end the life of a possible sociopath and rival competitor, he hesitates. And though it looks as if he'll go through with it, he almost seems relieved when Fern stops him. By all accounts, what Werble has been through his life should make him a jaded, hollow killer who only thinks of survival. But later he tells Frieren of the tales of Himmel the hero that he read as a kid. More importantly, the tales from his elders and those lost in the demon attacks of the time that Himmel was in their village. Fighting monsters, but also helping everyday people. And he reckons that if Himmel had never come to his village, it wouldn't still be there, whether he saved the world or not. The stories of Himmel's less exciting adventures are what brought him to sit next to Frieren on that day, a hero in his own right. Therefore, he always goes out of his way to help anyone in need and avoid any unnecessary violence. And all this time he speaks, and just before he leaves, Werble, this character we barely know and visually looks borderline evil, sounds an awful lot like Himmel. Though most of the people whom Frieren and our original party helped on their journey are long gone, there are 1,000 Werbles who grew up in villages that would only exist because Himmel was insistent on helping everyone, on 100%ing his quest, not just defeating the Demon King. Children who would see statues of great heroes who changed the world, but also changed their own parents' and grandparents' lives individually. Instead of cowering in the face of demons, these children take up the mantle of those before them. It's rather fitting, actually, since Himmel was no hero of legend. He couldn't even pull a sword out of a stone, but what made him a hero to the people of the village that guarded that stone was keeping his promise to them. so that other heroes may have a chance to pull that sword to live in a village not consumed by monsters. Because what would be the point of saving the world if the people you swore to save have no home, no lives after it's all over? The actions of the heroes' party not only saved the world, but fundamentally changed its people, investing in the next generation to make a kinder, more human way of being. And in a way, that's a larger scale version of the same change that happens to Frieren. Frieren is awkward. She knows this. She can even point out when others are awkward too, like her. Even when she better understands her emotions, she can't always articulate them in a way that she wants. She is an elf who has lived by herself for 1,000 years. You can't really blame her. But there's a misconception. Himmel didn't teach Frieren how to love. Frieren wasn't romantically in love with him, but also she already was capable of love. She loves magic, and she likely loved Flamel. The real problem was, outside of making a field of flowers, Frieren didn't know how to express her feelings in ways others would understand. And Flamel was clearly not awesome at it either, which is probably what you get when you're a human girl raised by a millennial old tsundere elf. And that's what Himmel and Heiter and Eisen were able to teach her. Not what love is, but how to talk to someone, how to show signs of affection, how to comfort someone, how to celebrate a birthday. They gave her the stepping stones to connect to people in a way she never could before. And it's clear that there is a difference. The Frieren of the past could have never been the mother and mentor to Fern that she so desperately needed, or the guardian that could convince Stark of his own self-worth, or the friend who could rekindle Cyan's sense of adventure. It's the human connection, the greatest magic her party ever taught her, that is the heart of Frieren's personal growth. But I'd be lying if I said it was just Himmel that instigated this change in people. Nearly every character in Frieren has someone in their life who is tantamount to changing them. Heiter with Fern, Gorilla with Cyan, and Stark in particular. Stark's story is a strong focus of several episodes. Stark too is awkward, bumbling through his relationship with Fern and Frieren, but his life is no less tragic. He lost his entire village to demon attacks after Himmel died. Saddled with survivor's guilt and crippling self-doubt, he not only sees himself as weak, but as a coward who left his brother to die. He was taken in by Eisen, and though trained well, their relationship ended prematurely when Eisen unintentionally struck him. An action that Eisen, though truly regretful of, never ended up apologizing for. And thus, even though Stark was physically strong, he felt he had disappointed both his brother and his mentor, grappling with whether or not he could truly be a great warrior. Until his birthday comes around, and Frieren became a chef and made him the ridiculously large Hamburg steak Eisen always made him for his birthday. And though Stark is happy, he assumes that this is the equivalent of a birthday cake for him with no deeper meaning. And Frieren identifies that this isn't necessarily true. Eisen used to make those same steaks for her and her party not only as a birthday gift, but as a form of praise for all the efforts they gave. Because in his culture, these Hamburg steaks are used to honor warriors, something Eisen never told Stark because he's awkward. So Stark went his entire life believing his mentor never praised him. And through that connection, that kindness from Frieren, who I swear knew exactly what she was doing, and also the world building itself, because Stark is most likely from a very similar region as Eisen, we see a light go off in Stark's head of the time his brother made that same Hamburg steak, when he was too young to understand its significance. In the middle of the night, him and his brother in front of the fire, so his cruel parents wouldn't find out, Stoltz made him a gift of praise. And Stark realizes that this whole time, his whole life, he hadn't been a disappointment. He had been loved. And my God, the scene of him realizing this, that his brother told him to run, to live, as his village burns to the ground with only the look of pride and love in his face. The quiver of Stark's lip as he takes a bite of his memories and sees it all clearly is both devastating, but reaffirming. Sometime later, there's an interesting part of the party's journey where Stark impersonates a deceased hero for that hero's father, and it parallels Stark's own family to a kind of creepy degree, where the man is a near identical replica of his father. And there's a scene where Stark rejects this man's offer to stay in the kingdom, to guard it, to keep the role of a hero and of his son, because, well, the man is still hurting. His son died after they had an argument, something so trivial he doesn't even mention what it was. When he found Stark, to him, it was a miracle. And between the two of them, they did find some form of closure over the families they've lost. But Stark plainly rejects the man, because he recognizes that he parted with his mentor in anger, and he's determined to return to Eisen and tell him all the stories of their adventures. Stark grows a lot through just a few episodes. His life is a rejection of the harsh warrior way of his father, and instead a reaffirmation of love and positive support from his brother and his mentor, even if his mentor could never fully articulate it. And even from Frieren. He is like Werbel, inspired by those who gave him a life he almost never had. Now, a story like Stark's is adjacent to so many others in Frieren, people inspired not only by the past, but by the people around them, and some still harboring regrets for never being able to communicate that feeling to those they cared about. But Stark has broken that cycle, along with Frieren. So why am I talking about all this? Why the human connection? About communicating your feelings, about how important it was for people like Himmel to give not only hope, but a life and a lesson for the next generation. Well, it's all because this is important context for where Frieren is heading. The Mage Exam arc is a convergence of all of Frieren's growth. This arc is rather really well put together, and with some very clever submersive elements. To start, the arc is split up into 3 challenges, of which a person must pass all 3 to be granted the status of a first-class mage. Frieren and Fern don't both have to get that status, only one needs the title for them all to be able to head past the Northern Way and continue their journey. The first challenge splits the 2 up along with a plethora of new characters, all with their own magic and styles. Frieren is stuck with 2 bickering childhood friends, whom she's able to mentor and protect throughout the challenge, like a mini Stark and Fern. Fern, on the other hand, has to put up with a work-from-home enjoyer and his possible yandere psychopath girlfriend, but her teams is kinda busted, so she's fine. But who I really want to focus on in this arc is the absolute GOAT, the old man of the hour, the Imperial Gramps himself, Denkin. Denkin is a very welcome subversion of the old, conniving, politically minded, power-hungry character he looks like at first glance, almost someone out of Game of Thrones. And to be fair, he was at some point, commanding armies and nations and political intrigue. But in almost defiance of that notion, Denkin is also one of the kindest and most determined of all the participants, explicitly forbidding his team from killing anyone, but also willing to go blow for blow when the need arises. Denkin was inspired to pursue magic by the party of heroes and by his long-deceased wife. He's taking the first-class mage exam not only because he desires a spell that Ciri can grant him, but because he wants to visit his wife's grave in the north before he gets too old and he needs the title of first-class mage to get there. He has no other family, no kids or grandkids, but he fills a parental figure role for the young mage in his group. He's almost a human version of Frieren in this instance, who is also traveling north to see someone whom she has lost long ago with Fern and Stark. And what makes Denkin so important is not only that he and Frieren have very similar philosophies about magic and the world, both are paramount to the success of every mage in the exam, and dismantling Ciri's ideology. Both Frieren and Denkin were born in Ciri's world, a mage stronger than both of them, who, despite knowing every grimoire and tale known to man and elf kind, could not think of a world without war. A time of peace, and imagination in the story is everything. If you cannot imagine it, it cannot exist, which is why Ciri never challenged the Demon King herself. In her mind, power and its pursuit are everything. If one is not willing to put aside everything to achieve it, they are not worthy to be called a mage, and unless her apprentices reach her level of power, they are considered failures. Even Flamel, with everything she accomplished. Denkin and Frieren, on the other hand, represent mages of peace, people who pursue magic for the love of the pursuit, people who know when things don't feel right, who are certain of their own convictions and who are more than willing to teach others when they can. Both have grown past their awkwardness to become more than selfish mages. They are mentors and teachers to the next generation, and no student of theirs, no matter how weak, is a failure. Frieren defeated the Demon King not by herself, but with every single member of her party. And if any of them hadn't been there, they would have lost. And the second challenge of this mage exam plays out in parallel. The second exam is a dungeon, with the rule that everyone who makes it to the end gets to pass. There are no limits, there is no scarcity like the last exam with a limited amount of these insane jet birds. I mean, man, these are so cool. Despite this, every group splits up and goes in on their own to Denkin's protest. But he's not totally alone, as those of his previous party, whom he took the time to know and treat as friends even outside of the exam, and even with the real possibility that they could compete against him, trust him and decide to continue down with him, as well as a few new faces, such as Best Lady Methode. And I find this section of the exam to be incredibly cool because Denkin's plan was 100% right. His group was the largest, most diverse, and arguably the most in sync out of any of the other groups. They make it to the bottom the fastest, working in tandem, fighting like a true dungeon party, with Denkin leading the charge to get all of them to the end. And they probably would have done it too, if not for the true challenge of this dungeon. You see, there is a monster at the end of this dungeon that can copy each and every person who enters the dungeon to a T. Their magic, their memories, their spells, their raw power, and it can control multiple of these clones at once. While the monster's main body is weak, it lies behind the last door of the dungeon, which is guarded by, well, unfortunately for Denkin's party, the literal worst case scenario. I just want to take a second, by the way, to praise this whole scene. The music, the ambience, how badass everyone in Denkin's party looks as they face down what, until this moment, was a relatively manageable challenge, and how it's already established of how much a monster Frieren is, and yet the simple fact that these random dudes are not immediately fleeing in a fight that they know they will lose, as a choir sings Frieren's name in the most ominous way possible. Like, it's a literally perfect scene. I know they do bolt directly after it, but even then, the people here were making Dark Soul edits for a reason, because it's just that good. Anyway, this is a problem. Denkin and the group, like I said, immediately flee because they simply cannot handle it. But it's even more of an issue than just that, because even though Denkin and the team are able to warn Frieren and Fern of the coming danger and get his entire crew out without any casualties, Frieren doesn't know if she can actually defeat herself, let alone all of the other replicas potentially roaming the dungeon deciding to converge on their position and team up against her. But Frieren coming in and soloing the whole exam was never the point. Instead, we get what Denkin had originally proposed. Every single contestant who made it this far contributing, offering information on the replicas, their origins, how they work, coming up with strategies, working together, even those who know they won't make it to the end, giving it their all for others, and eventually fighting to give Frieren an uninterrupted battle by playing against the replicas and revealing their own weaknesses so that they can fight together more efficiently. And we see Frieren herself put her trust in Fern as the ace in the hole. the human destined to kill her. And she couldn't be more proud. Something I noticed while rewatching all of Frieren, especially during the mage exam, is that most fights that are inherently too strong for a single protagonist to win are not then won by some out-of-pocket power-up or secret technique, but are instead won by a group of people with an inherent trust in each other triumphing over a single isolated challenger. Qual is defeated by Fern and Frieren, the Sleeping Flower by Sign and Frieren, Ubel's clone by Ubel and Land, Richter by Lewin and Khan with some help from Frieren doing that insane thing, Frieren's clone by Frieren and Fern, and arguably everybody else contributing to that victory. Every character offers something, even the most unsuspecting mage, and that's probably why I love nearly every character in Frieren. This whole section of the exam arc stands in stark contrast with both the philosophy of the demons and the philosophy of Ciri. The demons and Frieren may work together, but the relationships are inherently impersonal and transactionary. There is a pursuit of pride and power in everything they do, a hierarchy where the strongest are the greatest, where manipulation is a reoccurring theme in their string magic, blood manipulation magic, enslavement magic, in magic that takes the techniques of others and steals them imperfectly. They inherently lack the human connection, the concept of parents and kin, and underestimate their opponents at every turn, which is why they are always destined to lose. And Ciri is the other side of the same coin. She believes only those worthy of magic should possess it in her own arbitrary determination. That the age of humans is something to be wary of, that progress will make this magic that she covets less special. Which is why she doesn't understand when Frieren looks upon the age of humans with pride, and is happy that so many others will be able to live for the joy of magic and innovate it, change it, surpass them, paving the way forward for everyone who comes next, like a true teacher. Every hero in Frieren beyond Journey's End, Himmel, Stoltz, Frieren, Denken, Flamel, Heiter, Eisen, all reject the status quo, reject the isolation of the demons and Ciri. They've taught others not only to be stronger, but to be kinder, less awkward in themselves, or at least how not to let their awkwardness prevent them from trying to build meaningful relationships. And the next generation of heroes, of Stark and Fern and Werble and Gorilla and Cyan and many others, they will become stronger. Not because they lived in a world racked by war or were gate-kept from magic, but because they lived in an age of peace, where they were inspired by those determined to keep them safe. And in an odd way, I think Ciri understands this. The change in the world, even if she won't openly admit it. Because she's a hypocrite. Ciri is the judge of the final test. She fails several mages on the spot just by looking at them and finding their ambition lacking. And she fails Frieren too, after Frieren declares her favorite spell to be Flamel's favorite spell too, one that creates a field of flowers. And yet, Ciri passes Fern and Denken as well, along with a bunch of the other mages. Even though Fern has even less ambition than Frieren, and Denken shares Frieren's same philosophy on magic. Hell, she even passes Methode because she called her cute, which, fair, but Frieren also points out that even though Ciri calls Flamel a failure, the flowers in the very garden that Ciri is judging her in are clearly maintained by that same spell she had just called worthless. She then comically bans Frieren from the premise for 1,000 years, but it's too late. Frieren sees right through her, just like Himmel saw right through Frieren. Ciri is awkward, like Frieren is. Perhaps if Frieren had never met Flamel and Himmel, if she hadn't learned to care for Fern, she would have been a lot like Ciri. Because Ciri could never express her feelings to her students, even as she remembers every single one of them and their favorite spells. Regardless of whether or not they are failures or leave a mark on history, she regrets nothing about teaching them their magic. She enjoyed spending time with every one of them. maybe in another millennia, Serial will understand the same lesson that Frieren and Kraft learn: how to express to someone that you love them. I think it's appropriate then that the final few minutes of this anime is Frieren leaving town with Fern and Stark and having her new students meeting her outside the city and thanking her. And one last memory of her party in Himmel before the ED plays, which normally would be devastating. I mentioned before how much its lyrics are impactful, but somehow it feels a whole lot lighter, playing over the images of both the graves of Frieren's past, but also the people who currently live in the present that she was able to help. And Frieren's world now seems a whole lot brighter than the very first time this song played. Frieren is a duality. It is simultaneously devastating and beautiful, heart-wrenching, heartwarming. It brings about feelings of regret and pain, and yet even as you cry your eyes out, you are grateful, because even as Frieren remembers the past, you can see in this anime in the smiles of Frieren and her two children, because damn it, those are her kids. The past is not in vain. Those who are gone have created a better world with better people and a future of peace that you can't help but be happy about. There is no anime that has made me more emotional, no story that has resonated with me so much, and no script that was harder to write and record, because watching this anime's first half, I was stuck thinking only of Frieren's past. I wanted this video to be sad. I wanted it to be a tearjerker because that's what I thought this anime was about. And then I was disappointed for a bit when none of the later episodes elicited that same raw emotion from me. But I realize I missed the point of Frieren's growth. Her story is not about lamenting and crying over the past 28 episodes in. It's about appreciating the past, understanding what she lost and why, and using that knowledge to truly live in the present. It would be unfair for Fern and Stark if she did any less. So while it's easy to cry over what will never be, as Himmel says, tearful goodbyes aren't our style. After all, it would be embarrassing when we meet again. I love Frieren beyond Journey's End. I love Frieren as a character, as a concept, as a person. Seeing someone who's awkward too, who struggles with understanding emotions, and I've seen criticism of Frieren calling her emotionless, and I feel that couldn't be more wrong. The more we learn about how she thinks, how she reacts to the memories of her friends that she's lost, you cannot convince me that she didn't love the time she spent with them. The whole production is so subtle with its emotions, but I think that's what makes it so profound, so real. And the more I watch the anime, the more I realize that though she was particularly fond of Himmel, she loved Heiter and Eisen just as much. The mannerisms and the philosophies she adopts from them, the head pats, the recipes, the children, she keeps a piece of every single one of them as she goes along. But just as tantamount as her party, it's clear that in every way she is capable of, she loves Fern. I know the anime refers to her as Frieren's student, but in every way that matters, Frieren is Fern's mother. She cares for Fern, entertains Fern's interests, even if she doesn't care for them. She holds Fern's hands as she's sick, she bribes Fern with food, she tries her best to plan for Fern's birthdays, teaches her as best she can, offering her only praise. She never once yells at Fern or gets angry, and she does everything she can to understand her, even if Fern doesn't immediately realize it. She loves spending time with her. She even confides in Stark that she thinks she'll always think of Fern as a small child, not in a condescending old elf kind of way, but in the same way a mother can never think of her daughter as anything but her little girl. Frieren believes in Fern. Frieren loves Fern. And it's clear Fern loves Frieren too. She maybe has to treat Frieren more as a sister sometimes, but there's an attachment there that's clear as day. And I can't help but think of how proud Himmel would have been to see this. This elf girl who missed 50 years of her friends' lives because she couldn't understand the lives of humans will now never miss a moment of her daughter's life. She has been there for everything, even the small things, what truly matters. That's what, in my opinion, makes Frieren so perfect. Beyond the magic and the world building and everything else, I still think of Frieren as a love story. Not in a romantic way, but in a pure way. That pure love that defies time. Thank you for watching. This truly was the hardest video I have ever worked on, and I think the longest. If you enjoyed it and would like to help with the algorithm, please leave a like or even a comment. It can be stupid, anything helps. And if you want more reviews, I'm planning on a Dungeon Meshy one soon, so please consider subscribing. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.